Hello, valued listeners. Welcome to the Cracking Fitness Podcast. On today's episode, we have Dr. Shawn Baker. It was a very, very fun conversation that we had. This guy is the author of the Carnivore Diet. He is the host of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. He runs some pretty solid social media platforms that are not only fun to follow, but also very informative. We touch a lot of different areas in this podcast, from whether cow farts are hurting the environment to how meat may just be able to heal your gut and help you to reach some of your goals. Ultimately, the idea with this podcast is really just to get as much information from as many different experts and average Joes as we can, and then it's up to you to make the decision on what you want to do. I personally have never followed a fully carnivore diet, but meat is definitely a staple in my nutrition. I try to have red meat at least 3 times a day, but right now I currently also couple that with vegetables. Almost never raw vegetables, but cooked. And at this point, I also eat some carbohydrates. I've always felt it kind of necessary in my workouts to have carbohydrate. But that being said, we're here to learn as much as we can, and I would not take off the table that at some point I will try a fully carnivore diet. I really appreciate the time that Dr. Shawn Baker took to come on the podcast and to speak with us. If you guys have any questions about the episode, please hit me up, or you can also hop on his social media platforms and hit him up with any questions that you might have. A new little section that I want to add to the beginning of all these podcasts is just a book recommendation. So this is not a big one, not a big book, but it's called an official Who HQ book. It's a kid's book. It's a super easy read. You can probably read it in 20, 30 minutes, but the whole idea is each book is who was. So who was Nikola Tesla? Who was George Washington Carver? So the book recommendation this week is Who Was George Washington Carver? Very simple to read. You're going to read it very quick, but you can learn a lot about George Washington Carver. I like this guy. One, he was born into slavery and then became one of the first college graduates in the United States, but more than anything, he pretty much invented everything that we do with peanuts. Now, I don't know if I should be promoting a book for a guy that talks about peanuts when we had Shawn Baker on and he talks about all meat, but very, very interesting life that George Washington Carver led, and definitely recommend the book. I wouldn't say to do it on an audiobook because it's probably not worth the 15 minutes for how much it would cost. But if you have kids, they'll definitely be able to read it at some point. And these are the type of books that I say, yeah, just buy them. They're $6 and just start passing them around to your friends, because we can learn so much that we can apply in our lives from the lives of others. Also, today's episode is brought to you by Prevail Coaching. If you have some goals as far as fitness, health, and nutrition that you would like to reach, Prevail Coaching may just be able to help you out. It is a business that is fully centered on helping you as the individual. None of the plans that members get are templated programs, meaning that we're not just going to throw out generic programs to you. This is something that is catered to you and to your goals. We don't accept all clients, and the reason for that is we want to be honest with you. If we don't feel like we can help you, there are other people out there that can help you. So we want to make sure that it is a good, we could say, symbiotic relationship. So if you're interested, hit me up on social media, or you can go to prevailcoaching.com. If you like today's episode, please hop on and give us a good review on iTunes. Please hit the subscribe button, and also let us know if there are any other individuals that you're just dying to hear from that we can reach out and get them on the podcast. Thank you guys, and have a great day.
Bringing health, wellness, and fitness ideas right to your speakers with your host, Tyler Martin, learning from experts and average Joes alike. This is the Cracking Fitness Podcast.
All right, Dr. Shawn Baker, Man, I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us today.
Yeah, Tyler, my pleasure. Looking forward to a little fun conversation here. Hopefully this background, I left this background up from, I don't know, are we doing video or is this video or audio only?
We talk and then I just pull the audio from it. I
Okay,
haven't made the jump to the video realm yet.
that's fine then. I won't worry about it. This is from one of our other podcasts. We did a Q&A and this is our background. So
Oh, cool. No, that's
for
awesome.
the people that don't know, I got a picture of people holding up their hands and asking questions. So
No, that's perfect. So what is your podcast so that everyone can learn about it and go to
yeah,
it?
so it's a podcast. Zach Bitter. Zach Bitter is an ultra marathon or ultra distance runner. He's a world champion. He's got the 100-mile world record both on track and the American 100-mile record and the trail 100 world record for distance. He's a low carb athlete. He just asked me if I want to do a podcast one day because I've been doing a lot of athletic stuff as a low carb, now basically no carb guy. And so we teamed up about a year ago. It's called the Human Performance Outliers. It's on a bunch of different, all the typical media outlets for that. And, we've had some good success. We've got a lot of people that are enjoying it, some great guests, and, a lot of stuff into health and fitness and performance and some other things, agriculture. And so it's been fun to do. Having a lot of fun. We're about 120 episodes into it now, so we've been going just over a year, and so we've been cranking out the content, and I think people have been enjoying it. So lots of fun.
I know I've listened to a few episodes, and I've personally really liked it. I
learn a lot. I learn a lot. We get these wonderful guests, these experts in the world, and get on there, and you learn a lot. You take a little bit away from each of them, and it's a great way to share that. So
yeah, I think my favorite one that I've listened to so far is with the one that you did with Stan Efferding, that 2-part series.
Yeah, Stan's a great guy. Yeah, Stan's, like I said, there's theory and then there's results, and Stan's obviously gotten results. And so I think at the end of the day, we got to respect people that get results. And I think that's fun. And Stan's a smart guy. He's a bright guy and a good guy. I got to meet Stan and spent a couple hours chatting with him at a powerlifting meet where he judged me. I was deadlifting and Stan was the head referee. And so I hadn't done a powerlifting meet in years. It was just kind of an exhibition that Mark Bell asked me to come up there and deadlift. I was like, well, Mark, I haven't really trained for it in years, but I'll go up there and play with that. And so it was fun.
That's awesome. Well, it's been fun to see you guys collaborate. I mean, you, Mark Bell, his brother, which his brother's fully carnivore, right?
Yeah, Chris is pretty much all on board with carnivore. Mark dabbles in and out of it. They're both supportive of it. They see the tremendous benefit it has provided for literally thousands of people now. And so again, at the end of the day, it's all about results. But yeah, Chris is big into it. Chris is a good guy. I mean, he came from basically coming out of rehab with all kinds of health issues, and now he's in there just killing it. He's doing great. He's lost tons of weight, gotten really lean, getting really strong. He's got two artificial hips, and he's in there squatting and deadlifting like it doesn't matter. So good for him.
That's nuts. Which I guess you were a surgeon, correct? Or are?
Yeah, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I mean, I've done hundreds and hundreds of knee, hips, and shoulder replacements, and I know exactly what goes into that and what's going on. So yeah, that's they're very much in my field of specialty.
An outlier in those who can have a hip replacement surgery and then go squat 500 pounds, or is that just Yeah,
no, that's not typical. Obviously, that's that's definitely on the edge. But I'm fully supportive of I think lifting weights with joints for most people.
Yeah,
joint replacements, I think it's fine.
Yeah, well, we got to have that musculature around the joint.
Yep, exactly, protects the joint.
So I guess that's I jumped questions, but what exactly is the carnivore diet?
Yeah, so here's how I like to define it, and being one of the guys that's kind of largely popularized. It's not that I invented the diet. I mean, the diet probably was invented by some guy in the Homo erectus lineage, 1.5 million years ago or so. But really, it's just a diet where we focus on animal-based nutrition, nutrient-dense animal-based nutrition. I mean, animal-based products are far more bioavailable, nutrient-dense than anything else. And then I basically tell people, at that point, if your focus is on, getting your nutrition from primarily meat, then the rest of it is you either fully eliminate plants or you limit them to the degree necessary to focus on getting, as good of health as you can. So it's basically not that, eating a gram or a molecule of plant compound is going to, end the day or cause you to be kicked out of the club or, it's not that. I mean, it's just focus on, nutrition. For many people, it's strictly just meat all the time.
Yeah.
Some people will find that they do better with, meat with some seasoning. Some people will, do some things here and there. But again, I think it gets silly to pigeonhole it into saying that you only eat meat 100% of the time. Now, if you ask me what I do, I eat pretty much only meat, some eggs, some dairy, a little bit of seafood. Maybe I'll have some spices here and there, but that's about it for me. But I think to limit that to say that that's how everybody has to do it, I think that the real essence is it's not a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
It's a meat-based diet, and it's an animal nutrition-based diet. And I think that's, if we focus on that, then I think it becomes more accessible for more people. And I think that's the power. But I think if I tell people you can only eat raw meat and you have to eat, raw liver 6 times a week, you're not going to get many people that are going to buy into that or even want to do that. And I wouldn't want to do it. It's not palatable. So I think you got to consider it. It's a meat-based diet, basically.
Okay. Yeah, I tried I cooked up some marrow the other day, and I am all for eating meat and marrow, but I couldn't get past the texture. So.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't care how nutritious something is. If it's not palatable to you, then the nutritional value is zero because you're not going to eat it. So I think that's something we have to, contend with. And I think a nice ribeye steak is pretty damn palatable. Pretty easy.
I'm right there with you, and I don't think. Well, it's natural, right? I mean, even kids, and you've posted about this before. Trying to get kids to eat vegetables sometimes it's pretty hard. But if I say to my kids, "Hey, I just cooked up some steak," they're going to eat that. They're going to have no problem with that at all. So, it's probably a little bit in our DNA that we want to be eating meat.
Yeah, I mean, we evolved to do this. I mean, that's clear. I mean, there's no question whatsoever among anthropologists that humans ate a lot of meat. There's pretty decent evidence that we are prodigious meat eaters, particularly if you look at the isotopic data. That is a pretty darn decent way to look at things. I mean, if we look at other animals and we compare their nitrogen signals, we can know what a lion eats, we know what a wolf eats, and then if we can compare what human isotopic data looks like compared to that, and we see that in many cases it's very similar, almost the same, it's pretty safe to say humans ate a lot of meat. And I think that's clear. Now the question is, how much fruit did they eat? How much nuts? How much starch did they eat? That's debatable. At what times did they do that? They may find some dental scraping or some coprolites, which are fossilized, feces basically, and they'll see, well, there was some fiber in there, there's some plant material, but that, does not override the overwhelming evidence coming out of the isotope data, which is much more consistent and reliable for saying what a creature eats. So, yeah. Yes, humans did eat that, and then we have a reason for avoiding bitter compounds. If you go out there and eat most plants, if you go out and start eating leaves off the tree, they taste very bitter, and the reason is because they're poisonous, and that's why we have bitter taste, so we can avoid these poisonous compounds. And so now we've kind of, vegetables didn't really exist in the current form, and most likely humans would not have sought them out, particularly when we talk about leafy greens and stuff like that, because there's no real caloric value in that. I mean, there's not. You get almost no caloric value. Early humans didn't care about phytonutrients and this and that. They cared about getting calories and structure. And so most plants back then were very bitter, wouldn't have been edible, particularly the leaves and the stems and whatnot. Now we've bred some of that out of the plants. We've kind of reduced the toxicity. We've reduced the load. We haven't eliminated, but we've reduced it so it's not as acutely toxic to us. But for many cases, it's still not very palatable. And little kids will let you know. You put a piece of broccoli in front of a little kid raw. I mean, the only time, in most cases, the only way to eat those things is to smear them in some sort of animal fat or heavily season them. I mean, anybody that likes eating raw, uncooked broccoli, in my view, I just don't see it as being.
Yeah. Well, and even to unlock the bioavailability of it, you kind of have to cook it. I mean, it's just gonna go through your system. If you cook it, you're unlocking some bioavailability, but it's still not extremely bioavailable. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. I mean, one, just the very fact that it has fiber in it. Fiber binds up a lot of nutrition. And that's why a lot of people go on a plant-based, fiber-rich diet. They lose weight because they just lose nutrition. They're not absorbing calories. They're not absorbing nutrients. And some people, well, that's a good thing. I'm not absorbing. But I would argue that no, you need to eat for a reason. You're designed to take in nutrients. Now, you're not supposed to be taking in all this garbage and this sugary, high-calorie stuff, seed oil stuff that we've turned our modern food system in. But you need to be efficient at absorbing the nutrition that you ingest, and that's why it's important. Yes, there are a lot of compounds in plants, oxalates, phytic acid, fiber. These are all anti-nutrients that prevent the absorption of nutrition, and therefore eating a lot of those foods makes our nutritional requirements higher. You just have to eat more food to get that. And yes, many times the compounds in plants are not in the bioavailable form that we need for our human systems. Vitamin A is a very good example. We talk about beta carotene. Well, beta carotene we can't use. We have to have retinol. So we have to convert that first. And many people are very poor at converting retinol. And maybe one of the reasons that a lot of vegans that go on a diet fail very quickly. Some people last longer. Maybe they have better carotene to retinol conversion capacity, where other vegans will try it for a month or two and they're like, I just feel awful.
Yeah.
So I think there's some differences there. But clearly, plant-based nutrition is far, far inferior to animal-based nutrition when it comes to appropriateness of the nutrients, the bioavailability, the absorbability, and the digestibility.
So anthropologically and historically, we know this. We know what our ancestors ate. So what has created this firestorm of people believing that we have to have plant-based nutrition and it's important to have fiber? I mean, one of the questions from the listeners were, your thoughts on micronutrients and fiber. And I mean, because it's based, people they're like, hey, I got my fiber, I got to get my micros.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, what I would say is I don't think we know unequivocally what we ate evolutionarily. I know we didn't eat. We weren't eating, the processed food that we're eating today. We can clearly say that.
Absolutely.
We know that certain things weren't available. We know that modern fruits and vegetables weren't available to us back then. So we could say we probably weren't eating those things. There were some versions of certain things. We know that certain plants like nuts and seeds, without heavily processing, they're very toxic to us and they'll kill us. If you eat a handful of raw cashews, you'll be dead. You eat a handful of kidney beans raw, you're dead. A lot of cassava will kill you. And so until we develop those processing techniques, fermentation, sprouting, soaking, those things would have been very toxic to us. So we probably didn't eat a lot of those things. But what you're asking about micronutrients and fiber is not a requirement. It is not an essential requirement. You will not die without fiber. If we talk about what is essential for human beings, we have essential amino acids, we have essential fats, we have minerals, and we have vitamins. That's it. Anything else beyond that is non-essential. Now, there is an RDA for fiber. There are recommended doses for fiber. That is based on epidemiologic studies. That is based upon supposed benefits, but only in the context of a standard American diet for the most part. If you are eating a garbage-based diet, and most of Americans do, then fiber probably has a benefit in that situation, but it is not essential. You can live without fiber. I've not had fiber in my diet in almost 3 years. I am not dead, therefore it is not essential. In fact, there are numerous studies that show that fiber is actually potentially problematic in different conditions, things like chronic constipation. It doesn't seem to help in many issues. There are some things where maybe it will help mitigate a glucose response. Eating an apple versus drinking apple juice, yes, the fiber will limit your glucose excursion. However, if you're not taking in a bunch of glucose in your diet, you don't need that. It has almost no impact on blood pressure. It might help with satiety for some people. That may be beneficial. But again, eating a nutrient-dense diet also has a significant satiety effect. It may help benefit lowering cholesterol. Lowering cholesterol in all people is likely not beneficial. I think the evidence is becoming more and more compelling to show that certain situations, elevated cholesterol is fine. And so I don't think that fiber is definitely necessary. When it talks about micronutrients, it's the same thing we already talked about. You can get every single micronutrient you need from an animal. Now, we can make the argument of the RDA, and then you have to start saying, well, if I want to get enough vitamin C, I have to eat more liver. If I want to eat enough vitamin K, I got to maybe eat some more dairy. There are different things you can do within the animal spectrum to get your RDA. However, the RDA is probably not applicable to people on a meat-based diet, simply because of the fact that it was derived looking at populations eating fiber-rich, grain-rich, carbohydrate-rich diet. All of those things impair or increase the requirements for micronutrient absorption or micronutrient requirements. And so that's the deal there. I mean, I am, myself and thousands upon thousands of other people have been doing this for a long time, including up to 20 or even 50 years, are not developing micronutrient deficiencies. In fact, I'm thriving, still breaking, performing at a world-class level, despite being in my 50s, without any plants. So I think that argument is based on faulty assumptions and data derived from people eating, grain-based diet.
So are these RDA values coming from epidemiological studies then? Is that
there's a host of ways they develop the RDAs. Sometimes they'll test a couple people and just do that, and they'll determine it based on that. They're based on population surveys, where they'll look at a population and say, who are the people in this population that get this particular disease, and what were they eating? These are at best very weak estimates of what we need. Even the people that study the RDAs will concede that this is basically just a consensus of expert opinion, which is considered among the lowest level of evidence possible. There's not like good randomized control trials to show us what the RDA should be. So it's basically kind of a guess. And this is kind of sad because much of the entire field of nutrition is based on these RDAs, which are at best a guess. And so you've got this whole field whose very foundations are completely weak.
So I have a tough time when I hear people say, well, plant-based is the only evidence-based diet, or they talk about evidence-based medicine. So I'm a critical care paramedic, like a flight paramedic certification. So obviously not even close to the level that you're at as far as education. But one thing that I have noticed over the last 10 years of doing it is whatever study and drug we're giving today, it's probably going to be different in 5 or 10 years, or at least it will have changed because the data changes. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they talk about, it's the only evidence-based. That's absolutely garbage. I mean, it supports their ideology. I mean, they're ideologically driven. They discount any evidence that disagrees with their animal rights views. I mean, it's basically animal rights, and it's propped up by, currently it's being propped up and pushed by processed food companies because they see a large windfall in profits for, having people select plant-based products. I mean, they promote plant-based, but really that means cheap ingredients with high profit value. So anytime I see something with plant protein or plant-based, I think cheap and profitable. And there's a huge financial push for this. We can just look at the Beyond Meat company, which just IPO'd. I think they're valued at, I can't remember what it is now, a couple $1 billion right now. And that's where it is. There's these people that have an agenda, and it's to make money, and it's not about your health. And they're willing to fund studies that are favorable to their products. They're willing to buy media. They're willing to spend the money to get you to buy their product. And it's no surprise. It's what Procter & Gamble did in the 1920s when they bought the American Heart Association by donating $1 million to have everybody promote Crisco in the American diet. And we're just seeing the same thing over and over again.
So how do we sift through those poor studies?
Well, I don't know that you need to. I mean, there are literally, 500,000 or more studies on nutrition out there. You're never going to read all those studies, and you can find, I can very quickly, and I do it all the time, I can find a study to support any position I want, right? It's very easy to do. What you've got to do is basically take matters in your own mind, in your own hands, and assess what diet does to you. Be very objective about it. Measure what's important to you. I mean, I can tell you what I think is important, but I think you just have to say, look, it's too confusing. There's too many conflicts of interest here. There is serious problems with the way our research is done. There are serious limitations in what we can know. And if we accept that, then we have to say, let's be objective with ourselves. what is the most effective way for me to assess how nutrition impacts my own health? Well, it starts with making things simple. Now, you can go on a completely plant-based diet and say, I cut out all meat, dairy, eggs, whatever, see how I do. Okay. But if you cut out junk food and you cut out sugar and you cut out seed oils at the same time, you're not really simplifying that process. And so I think you have to say, cut out one thing or cut out everything. And I think those are your two options. Like I said, if you only cut out meat and continue eating the Twinkies and the candy bars and your health doesn't improve, well, what does that mean? Is plant-based better? Or if you say, I'm going to go only meat and cut out all the other garbage and your health dramatically improves, what does that say? And I think that's how you have to start to look at things. And then what do you measure? I think, and as a physician who's drawn and looked at thousands of labs and x-rays and MRIs, I really think that, you have a better tool at your disposal just in the mirror. How am I feeling? How do I feel when I get up in the morning? How do I sleep? What's my body composition like? What's my digestion like? What's my mental health like? What's my mood like? What's my joint health like? What's my sexual function like? Those things are true indicators of health. There are some long-term studies. You can get a coronary artery calcium scan if you're older. You get a carotid artery scan that might show some stuff that's still a little bit transient. Yeah. We have an over-reliance on a blood test. We got to remember a blood test changes every hour throughout the day, every week. And so going in there and getting your blood drawn, everybody talks about my blood work, or you get my blood work.
Yeah.
Don't put too much faith in that. If you're acutely sick, it's very helpful to know what's going on. It can show you something that's very important. For most chronic conditions, it may not be that helpful. I mean, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that you have to understand what's going on clinically as you interpret blood results. You have to realize that many, many things affect your day-to-day blood lab values, and it can be how much sleep you got, what you ate last, what time you got up, what time of day it is. There's incredible diurnal variation in labs. Anytime somebody shows you a lab value, one thing you should do is look up the diurnal variability. Vitamin D. Most people are worried about vitamin D. Low vitamin D maybe is associated with a lot of medical problems. Now, if you get your vitamin D taken at 7 a.m., it may be 30% lower than if you got it taken at 11 a.m. So just knowing those sort of things, you have to sort of, keep in the back of your mind that blood tests are not the be all and end all of what your health's doing.
Which I guess kind of comes back to the studies, how things change, or you can find a study for anything. Cholesterol used to be, hey, we can't have high cholesterol. We can't have high cholesterol. Well, now they're not seeing that there's really that huge association with, heart disease and all of that. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the cholesterol topic is an interesting one, and there's a lot of discussion around that these days. People that are out there saying that cholesterol doesn't immediately give you a heart attack are being labeled as cholesterol deniers. And they try to lump you in a category of just crazy people, flat earthers, and so on and so forth. But I think the cholesterol question is very nuanced. I think we have to understand that, most Americans are sick, fat, and metabolically dysfunctional. And I think that in that situation, high cholesterol probably increases your risk for cardiovascular disease. I think that's a realistic observation. But if you're not pursuing the standard American diet, if you're not pursuing the diet that makes you inflamed, gives you insulin problems and metabolic disease, then in that situation, it's very possible and very likely, in my view, that high cholesterol is probably not the issue that we think it is. And so I think that's how we have to think of cholesterol at this point, based on, at least in my view.
Yeah. So with that whole subject there of labs and blood work, you had mentioned glucose. We had a listener, he's a vegan, pretty hardcore vegan, and he asked about your blood tests, in particular testosterone, also your fasting glucose and insulin. I was just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that and just kind of explain that all and how that works on a carnivore diet versus plant-based.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I want to, say this is carnivore diet, where anytime you look at one particular person's lab values, you can't you extrapolate that to a whole population. I mean, it's individual. Look, I'm a world-class athlete. I mean, the average person doesn't need to be looking at my labs and making assumptions on that, basically. Now, with regard to, testosterone, I had a testosterone test done immediately after an extremely challenging workout the day before. And it was low. It was even below normal levels, right?
Yeah.
So people say, well, that you've got a testosterone level of an old grandma, right? But in the meantime, I'm 6'5", I'm 250 pounds of lean muscle. I can deadlift 500 pounds for 10 reps.
Yeah.
Do backflips, win rowing world championships. I wake up every day with a rock hard erection. Clinical testosterone function, is important. Now, Stuart Phillips in 2018 out of McMaster's University just did a study looking at muscle building in young athletes, looking at testosterone free, bound, all these hormone markers, and found that testosterone level had nothing to do with muscle building capacity, in unsupplemented athletes. Now we're talking about people taking drugs. It's a different story. Yeah. The biggest thing that made an effect was androgen receptor density. And so if your androgen receptors were high, then your testosterone level didn't matter. That was the thing that primarily drives your capacity to build muscle. And again, we have to realize that, and I took my testosterone a week later, and it was 150 points higher. And so it changes throughout the day. And so just to point to someone who, like me, who's in my 50s and say I'm low testosterone or clinically low testosterone is just ridiculous. I mean, any of these vegans out there that would come up and say that, I would, basically they would pale in comparison with the amount of muscle. Even the vegan bodybuilders, the little guys that are, 170 pounds or a little lean and got a little bit of muscle. I'm 250 pounds of muscle basically. So this is ridiculous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And to not understand the day-to-day variation on a hormone level. Remember, it fluctuates every day. I mean, I talked about this years ago. I said, somebody asked me about testosterone. I said, I've never checked it. I don't care. Maybe my receptor density is higher.
Yeah, I remember that.
I did that with Dennis Mangan on a podcast long before I'd ever draw my testosterone. So I can probably draw it 3 days in a row and I'll get 3 widely different variations depending on how much rest I've had. So I don't really, put much faith in that. If you're worried about your testosterone number rather than your ability to get it up, that's a problem. You should worry about what your function is. Blood glucose is another interesting. So fasting glucose was high, A1C was high. And so if we look at if you look at historical populations like Inuit who were tested in the 1920s, their fasting blood glucose was about exactly what mine was. They suffered from no evidence whatsoever of diabetic complications. Now, interestingly, my fasting insulin was extremely, extremely low, which is associated with very good insulin sensitivity. Now, the counter would be that you're just not making enough insulin. You're therefore a type 1 diabetic or a type 1.5 diabetic. That would mean I would be needing to inject insulin eventually and getting sick. That's not occurring. It just doesn't match up. And so when we look at high-level athletes, we see this not infrequently, that guys are engaging in extremely, extremely demanding sprint-type sports show higher than normal fasting blood glucose. We see this in Olympic athletes. We see this with elite athletes. We see this with professional basketball players. And so it's athletic physiology. And if I were to not train, my glucose would drop back to normal, like almost every other carnivore dieter that does this. They end up with relatively lower glucose. Now, the one thing about glucose is we have to understand that is the most important thing to probably look at is the fluctuations in glucose. So if you have steady glucose numbers, that is far more important and more valuable than if you have low glucose in the morning, but it goes way up and down all the time with your meals. And that's what we typically see with people with diabetes. They have wildly unstable glucose numbers. My numbers are rock stable. I mean, after I eat, they even go down sometimes. And so, I mean, that's just a poor understanding of human physiology. And that goes to even many physicians. They don't understand that diabetes is really probably more of an insulin-related problem than it is a glucose problem. Glucose is a marker, just like cholesterol can be a marker. It can go up and down for different reasons, but stability is probably more important. So I have zero evidence of any diabetic pathophysiology, in anything clinically going on, if you look at every other marker that would predict that. So that's just another red herring and people that just don't understand physiology, and they parrot what some vegan activist has said.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I've wanted to get one of those Dexcom 5 glucose, like continuous monitors, just because I'm curious. And I know the importance of that stable, your stable insulin.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I can tell you all the people that I have seen on a CGM on a carnivore diet, without exception, have shown rock solid, stable blood glucose numbers. It's just like a flat line. Even type 1 diabetics, straight line, and type 2 diabetics, even particularly as they've adapted. Now, in the beginning, they may be a little bit of fluctuation, but as they do carnivore diet long term, it is as flat and as perfect as you could ever hope for. Any endocrinologist would be as happy as can be to see those CGM readings.
we live in a world where people just want pills to fix their everything, and I think a lot of times if they would just walk more and eat better, we'd get rid of most of our issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we as a society step away from the pills, the supplements, the expectations that aging means getting old. I mean, aging means getting ill, rather. Then we would radically change our economy. And that's the problem. There is a huge multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry that depends upon you and I to be sick and to chronically take pills and supplements. Processed food companies also are multi-billion-dollar companies, which also depend on us to continue to eat their garbage. That's just the way it is. And there is billions of dollars of advertising, lobbying, and influence that is being directed to have us to continue to do that.
Yeah. So taking this from the sport perspective, you're is it world record holder on the rower?
Yeah, so I've set 3 world records on the indoor rower concept 2. I've had world records in Highland Games. I've had world records in powerlifting. I was a professional, semi-professional rugby player. I mean, I've operated at high levels in a number of different sports. I was a Masters All-American track and field guy. Yeah, I mean, I've got a number of records. The records I set on the rowing machine were done as a strict carnivore without carbohydrates in what is a very highly glycolytic activity without taking in exogenous glucose. I made my own, so I can perform well, and as have many other athletes. There are a number of athletes now, high level athletes that are doing carnivore that are performing extremely well.
Yeah. So I think of that as, you're rowing. I think of that as kind of power, like a powerhouse, because it's 500 meters, right? Is the ones that you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, I just won the world championships in the 500 meter. I've got the 1 minute record, which is about 415 meters,
That's awesome.
and the 100-meter record, which is a pure sprint. Which is a sprint, which is basically the CPK system. It doesn't even get into glycolysis.
Yeah. And then your podcast counterpart, he runs 100-mile races, and he's pure carnivore.
No, Zach's not pure carnivore. Zach is sometimes carnivore. He does it for most of his recovery cycle. He's low carb throughout much of his training. He does cycle up some carbohydrates during certain workouts, and he does use some carbohydrates during his races. So I think it's Zach would be first to tell you that he doesn't do it purely, but he does do carnivore quite a bit. He does include a lot of meat. He eats a couple pounds of meat every single day, even though he's a relatively small guy, but he finds it to fuel his performance needs. He's eating lots of meat, and then going low carb, and then going zero carb in the recovery phases.
Okay. So one of our listeners was curious about fueling during HIIT workouts, and I know this person's a CrossFitter and fairly high level, so they're doing multiple aerobic, CP work, and glycolytic, throughout the week, and so they're just curious about fueling.
Yeah, and so I think one, you have to realize there's an adaptation period, and the adaptation period may be 3 to 6 months for a lot of people for athletics, and so I think that the 2 biggest things are not eating enough in general. So you got to make sure you eat to your demand. And so you may end up eating quite a bit. If we look at how protein, and is basically released when it comes to blood glucose, glucose tends to spike around 4 to 6 hours after a meal on a protein-rich meal. And so that's probably, if you're timing your meals and your workouts, if you're looking at glycolytic stuff, that may be of benefit. I find that adding electrolytes, can be helpful prior to a workout, particularly takes this thing like salt, just like salt sodium chloride, just to increase intravascular water. So salt water, drinking a fair bit of fluid with some salt in it, it's going to help with that. It's going to help, put more water in your muscles, which is going to help you perform better. Also, if you're doing 2-a-day workouts, let's say, you've got an AM workout and then a PM workout. I mean, you either, eat 3 or 4 hours prior to your first morning workout, or eat a big meal the night before, and then eat immediately or shortly after, within a couple hours after your first workout. So like if you're working out at 9 a.m., maybe eat by 11, do your next workout at 4 or 5, and then eat a big dinner after that. That's going to help with muscle protein synthesis, glycogen restoration, because protein will help you to restore glycogen through gluconeogenesis, particularly if you're on a low carbohydrate diet, particularly liver glycogen. That works pretty well.
Okay. That's interesting. So important to remember then, just that there is that period of time where you need to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely an adaptation period.
Okay. Do you find that depending on how poor the diet was before, it takes longer or shorter for that adaptation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people coming from a ketogenic diet tend to adapt a little quicker because they're used to a fat-based metabolism. I think there's still some adaptation things. There's some concern about oxalates, because a lot of time a ketogenic diet can be a high oxalate diet, and so sometimes, we have to taper out of oxalates to avoid some issues with oxalate, kind of oxalate dumping potentially. But I mean, somebody that's clearly dependent upon glucose and carbohydrates will have a harder time and a longer time than somebody that's not. So absolutely, there's a time difference.
Okay. Another listener question, are cow farts causing global warming?
Yeah. So, first it's cow belch is where the methane comes from. They're ruminants. So as opposed to hindgut fermenters, like certain primates and other animals, like horses and stuff like that, where the methane comes out the back end, methane comes out the front end of cows. Now, the shorter answer is no, it's not. The long answer is that, greenhouse gas emissions, and we can convert methane into carbohydrate equivalents, and that's how they measure greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, from animal agriculture, is about 14%. That is based on life cycle assessments that's involving everything that's used to make those animals, whether it's transportation, whether it's the crops that are fed to them sometimes. The direct emissions from the cow actually burping is only about 5% of the world's greenhouse gases. Now, and it depends on what country you're in. Now, in the U.S., for instance, cows produce about 1.9% of our greenhouse gas, so it's a tiny, tiny amount. You and I live in the United States. If we were to go vegan and we were to get rid of all the cows and all the dogs and all the cats and all the horses and make all the animals disappear from the United States, the impact worldwide would be about 0.3% less greenhouse gases. So almost negligible. Okay. Hospitals in the United States our healthcare system produces about 10% of our greenhouse gases. And so if you avoid going to the hospital by eating a meat-based diet, you're saving money there. And so it's a very nuanced conversation, but more important to the point, most of the greenhouse gases that are produced from animals are produced in developing countries, third world countries, where they have very inefficient agricultural practices. The cattle herd in India is about 200 million cattle. Most of them are sick, diseased, they're very inefficient. Those are the things we could do to help with mitigating further greenhouse gas. And now methane, as we've come to find out, is a very short-lived greenhouse gas. And so although it has a approximately 25 times higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide does, over the short term, over the long term, it is so short-lived in the atmosphere relatively that it makes far less difference than carbon dioxide. So digging up fossil fuels from the ground, putting it in the atmosphere, is going to cause higher amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and potentially lead to global warming. Now, of course, there are people that debate whether it has an effect at all. That's a different issue. But if we just compare based on believing that man is causing global warming, it is not cow farts. It is fossil fuels. It is transportation. It is energy sector. It is, those things make up about 80% of our global greenhouse gases. And so that is where our attention should be. It should not be on cow farts and then putting people on a nutritionally deficient diet to fix the atmosphere. We need to get away from our reliance on fossil fuels. That is a better solution if we're going to have one. So, I mean, this is just a distracting, a distracting argument that takes away from the real problem.
Yeah. Well, and I read somewhere, I don't know if it was on your social media or somebody else's, but like 1 acre of peas to do pea protein is like 400 times more water than it takes to feed a cow or to hydrate a cow.
Yeah, I can't tell you this. I can't speak exactly on the pea protein because I don't remember seeing stats on water. But I know, if we look at almond milk, according to the UCLA life cycle evaluation done, which includes all the water and all to feed the crops, to feed the cows, shows that almonds require about 17 times as much water to produce a liter of almond milk versus a liter of cow's milk. The pea protein thing, to get the appropriate amount of essential amino acids like leucine or lysine, to get that in pea protein, it requires about 5 times as much land as to get the equivalent amount from beef. And so these vegan bodybuilders are using all this pea protein are actually probably more destructive to the environment. And it requires all this monocropping, and the monocropped agriculture, if not done correctly, and there's some rotational, many of the monocrops are rotated, so that may be helpful. But in general, the monocropped agriculture does cause a loss of diversity to the wildlife. It destroys the soils, requires heavy pesticide, herbicide usage. And so that is a big issue. And that's probably more of an issue than a cow raised on grass, or at least pastured regeneratively, which is where we should be directing our efforts, is restoring the soil, getting a higher percentage of our cows, pastured in a regenerative fashion.
Okay. Do you find a difference in, I guess, your own performance and those who are dabbling in the carnivore diet with grass-fed versus non-grass-fed?
No, I don't. Not for me. There's some people that say they feel better on grass-fed. I don't personally. I want to be very honest about that.
Yeah.
I think there's some very good reasons to support regenerative agriculture. I'm not convinced human health is one of those, but I do think we need to push for that route.
Okay. One more question I wanted to ask, and then, well, I guess 2 more questions. One will just build on the other. Depression and the carnivore diet. I guess that's not a question. That's a statement that I'll just let you talk.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, so many people, not all, but many people note remarkable improvements in mental health on a carnivore diet. And it can be depression, it can be anxiety, it can be people with bipolar disorder. There's even people with schizophrenia that have noticed improvement. Why that is speculative. It could be that gut disruption via things like leaky gut permeability problems contribute to mental health disease. I think there's decent evidence to support that, and I think for many people, carnivore diet improves the gut integrity. It may be a nutritional thing, getting the appropriate nutrient dense materials, some of the micronutrients in meat, zinc, iron, carnitine. L-carnitine has been linked with major depressive disorder. So a relative deficiency in L-carnitine, which many vegetarians and vegans have, has been linked with major depressive disorder. Meat contains lots of carnitine, which is directly absorbed by our body and raises our levels. So that can be effective. Just having adequate fats and cholesterol. Again, remember, our brain is about 25% of our body's cholesterol is devoted to our brain. And so those things all may have a role in mental health. Clearly, we're seeing it. There's probably numerous reasons why we're seeing improvements.
Do you think? Well, one, I find it very interesting that as processed food increases, we also have this mental health epidemic right now. But it does seem to be getting worse. Do you think it could be like an epigenetic issue? As our parents are eating worse and we're eating worse, it's kind of building up on itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing that with metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, but I don't doubt that mental health is probably also there. I mean, I think again, eating a horrible diet that's all this processed food garbage, and I don't want to single out a plant-based diet because I think garbage junk food is probably the biggest issue.
Yeah.
Um, I think that yes, there are epigenetic modifications that are occurring on numerous things. I think that it does get worse from generation to generation, and it's sad to see. I mean, these kids that are in utero are some of their adult behaviors and diseases are being you know directed you know in the uterus. So it's probably going on for sure.
So we want to combat that. We need to get our country healthy. So what can people do to just the average person that's out there? So standard American diet. What can they do today, right now, to just start being better as far as health and nutrition?
Well, I mean, the first thing you do is you have to care. You got to care about your health, and you've got to then buy into the fact that nutrition affects your health, and I think it clearly does. I think the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor that it does. And then you have to do some personal education. You have to invest in yourself, invest in your family. You have to educate yourself. I think you just have to change. And I don't know what it has to be. I would argue for a meat-based diet. Obviously, I think that's a very successful strategy for most people. It's very easy to figure out, if you eliminate a lot of things, and restrict to one or two things, then it becomes very easy to figure out what other things are causing an impact on your diet. You need to evaluate what's important to you from a health standpoint and lifestyle standpoint. Go from there, and I think I think step one is to get yourself healthy, get your family healthy, and then you can start to, if we're talking about healing the country, and then you can start to advocate, for this stuff because weak people do not make, a healthy country, and I think our country is in danger of a lot of problems. The continued violence, continued mental health disorders, continued social problems, which probably some of those originate from sick people, sick, unhealthy people. And so we need healthy, strong people, to populate the planet, and I think we'll be better off for it.
It's a little scary right now. There's even, advocates and lobbyists that are just trying to force plant-based on people, and I don't think that is right.
Yeah, well, you're preaching to the choir here. Obviously, there are people that think we have to do that to save the planet. They are misguided, in my view. It's going to come back if we ever go down that route. It's going to go back to bite a lot of people. I think it's going to set us up for a whole bunch of miserable humans that are sick, and it plays right into the hands of people that want to profit from that stuff. And I think, smart people will realize that that's just not the way to go. And hopefully more of us will spread the message. I think there's a push for social media censorship for people that are not towing the line with the plant-based message. And we're seeing that. And I think we have to, all of us, stand up and, convert as many possible people as possible. Get the message out there that plant-based is not necessarily the way to go, and it's certainly a potential to cause a lot of harm and damage.
Yeah. That's a depressing subject. We just need to remember freedom of speech is the First Amendment. So we yeah.
Yeah, I mean, freedom of speech, sure. I mean, that's one of the founding principles of the United States, and we enjoy this. Not every country enjoys freedom of speech. We need to cherish it, protect it. And I mean, unfortunately, speaking on a social media platform doesn't guarantee you freedom of speech. They're not the United States government, and so there is some potential for that. And so there may be migrations to alternate platforms, from Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and some of these other places that Facebook that might find that they want to wield their influence and you know mold people to believe what they want them to believe. And so I think that is a little bit of a scary thought.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I appreciate about what you've done and what you're doing is just that you're willing to go a little bit against the grain. I mean, the world right now is not, they're not out there saying, let's advocate for a carnivore based diet, meat based diet, it seems like for the most part, there's a lot out there that's advocating for the plant based. So I just appreciate your willingness to go against the grain a little bit. And we all need to be open to that. Anyone who's listening that is plant based, they can do whatever they want. I don't care what people do. I mean, if that's what they want to do, then that's what they want to do. But at the same time, they've got to be open to listening to other things. And if they're not, then they can't be mad at what I do.
Well, I mean, they'll say it's for the greater good. Greater good. You just need to eat fake food and plants to save the planet. And I mean, that's what they believe. I mean, they are literally brainwashed into believing this stuff. And yeah, you're right. If you want to eat that stuff, good. That's fine. I don't think you're very wise if you do that. But to restrict what I have access to eat, or limit what I have access to eat, or try to attempt to tax or restrict or shame me. I mean, there's people out there that working for the United Nations that want to put meat eaters out on the balcony with the smokers. So you shouldn't even be allowed in a restaurant if you eat meat, which is, again, I don't think we should tolerate that.
No, I'm right there with you. Well, I know you're a busy guy, and you're out there doing a lot of good things, and I appreciate it, but I don't want to take too much of your time. I really appreciate all the time that you have taken with us. I think anyone who listens, if they can just kind of have an open mind about this stuff and be able to experiment a little bit with themselves and not get so caught up on the data and the research that may be faulty and faulty data and research, then we'll all be in a better place.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for having me on, Tyler. I appreciate the opportunity to chat and spread my little craziness. But
yeah, no, I appreciate it. Where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram, Shawn, SHAWN, Baker, BAKR, 1967. They can find me on Twitter at SBakerMD. They can find me on my YouTube channel, which is just Shawn Baker. They can find me where else? World Carnivore Tribe Facebook group. I just started an account on Gab, which is kind of a crazy social network that allows for unlimited free speech. Some people criticize it because there's some crazy neo-Nazis and stuff on there. But again, it's free speech. I think that, the problem with free speech is you got to give free speech to assholes. And so, I mean, you're either going to have it or you're not. And so on that one, I'm under Shawn Baker, MD. Okay. Shawn-Baker.com is a website. You can check out meatheals.com. We are going to be launching animal-based nutrition network.com very shortly, which will be a wide-ranging place for people that are in favor of eating meat or animal-based nutrition, which will include links to physicians, recipes, information, data, research, how you can become involved politically, health coaching, fitness stuff, producers that are producing meat, ranchers, even maybe even a dating site. So we've got that coming down the pike. So those are all going to be fun things that's going to be coming out very, very, very soon.
Awesome. A place that meatheads can meet and produce more little meatheads.
That's right. We need more meatheads in the world. Little meat kids. Perfect, man. All right. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Awesome. Thanks, Shawn. Have a great day.
Okay.
We'll see ya.